There are questions that do not ask for answers. They linger, like fog around a memory or perfume in the ruins of a forgotten cathedral. They press against the ribs not to be solved, but to be felt, lived, endured, bled through. And so we begin with a silence, the kind that follows the end of a storm, the kind that comes not from peace, but from exhaustion, the quiet that settles in the heart after another love has collapsed under the weight of its own illusions. She sits there, whoever she is, staring through glass, touching her own wrist absent-mindedly, not knowing why she aches. He was wrong for her. They all said it. She knew it. But something deeper, something without a name, kept her there, wanting, bleeding, hoping, against every rational fiber, that the cold would become warmth. Why? This is not a question for psychologists or talk shows. It is older than the first temple, older than myth. It is the ache carved into Eve's shadow as she turned back to look at Eden, not because she missed the paradise, but because she missed the serpent's voice. Carl Jung knew where to look, not in logic, but in the dream, in the symbol, in the ancient images that rise from beneath the floorboards of consciousness, soaked in blood and archetype. He spoke not of women as individuals, but of woman as archetype, the anima, the inner feminine force that dances not toward security, but toward transformation. And transformation, he knew, is almost always born in fire. Do you remember the stories? Not the sanitized ones, but the real myths, still dripping with teeth and moonlight. Persephone didn't fall in love with Apollo. She was dragged into Hades. Psyche wasn't courted. She was betrayed, blindfolded, tested, and torn. In every tale, the feminine principle does not flourish in safety, but descends into darkness, into betrayal, into the arms of the trickster, the tyrant, the wounded god. Not because she hates herself, but because the soul knows something the mind does not. Jung did not believe that women were foolish. He believed they were ancient, that within them lives a force so wild and primordial that it cannot be appeased with flowers or logic. It craves depth. It seeks the underworld, not out of masochism, but because the descent is the only path through which true wholeness is found. In every suffering woman, there is a silent scream of sacred initiation, a rite the modern world no longer recognizes, and so it is misread as dysfunction, self-destruction, insanity. But what if it is a calling? What if the women who love what wounds them are not broken, but ancient priestesses enacting rituals they do not remember, in a language that has been stolen? The anima does not respond to gentle explanations. She listens instead to symbols, to atmosphere, to the curve of a lie told with conviction. She is seduced by masks, not because she wants to be fooled, but because she wants to unmask. The wounded man becomes her altar, his chaos her crucible. She does not want the man who brings her flowers. She wants the man who carries the storm, so she can walk into it and see if she survives. And this is where the tragedy begins. Because in a world where soul is forgotten, the rituals lose their shape. The descent becomes a trap. What was once initiation becomes addiction. Women fall not because they are weak, but because the world no longer gives them the mythic frame to rise. They are told to be strong, but not wild. To be kind, but not fierce. To be safe, but never sacred. So the anima rebels. She turns her love toward the forbidden, the emotionally unavailable, the broken, the cruel, not because she wants to be harmed, but because some part of her believes, hopes, that within his chaos lies a doorway, that if she loves him enough, she can make him whole, and in doing so, complete herself. But this is the great illusion. You cannot resurrect a god who has no altar. You cannot love a man into becoming myth. And still, she tries. She forgives. She returns. She explains him to her friends. She makes excuses to herself, not because she is naive, but because she is possessed by something older than reason. And so it continues. The longing, the confusion, the self-doubt, She does not understand why the stable man feels like a stranger, why she cannot desire what she respects, why the one who treats her. It is not because she is shallow. It is because something in her remembers the cave, the blood, the knife in the dark. Something in her soul still believes that suffering is sacred, that pain will unlock the mystery, that if she gives enough, bleeds enough, breaks enough, she will be reborn. But the world no longer honors rebirth. It only diagnoses the wound. It medicates the ache. It pathologizes the soul's longing for transformation. And so she is told, "You're codependent. You have low self-esteem. You attract narcissists." No one tells her that maybe, just maybe, she is reenacting a myth as old as time. That maybe the pain is not a flaw, but a map. She isn't broken. She is searching. And the path she walks is littered with roses and thorns, dreams and ashes. Jung once said that what we do not make conscious will appear in our lives as fate. And perhaps this is the core of it. She does not know why she loves the flame, only that she does. And until she sees the archetype in the mirror, she will walk into fire believing it is love. And in a way, perhaps it is. But love, real love, the kind that transforms rather than consumes, begins when the woman turns inward. When she recognizes that the descent was never about him, that the man was never the point. He was the door, and she was always the storm. She cannot escape the reflection, though she spends years trying. It appears not only in mirrors, but in moments. In the half-second pause after a cruel word. In the way her hand trembles as she locks the door behind him, again. In the silence she fills with rationalizations. Each time, she tells herself the same story, that it's complicated, that he's damaged, that love is messy. But beneath that story, a deeper current pulses. One that Jung understood too well. The soul knows what the ego denies. And it leads her, again, into the same arms. Not always the same face, no. Sometimes he is a poet. Sometimes a drunk. Sometimes both. Sometimes he arrives dressed in spiritual language, promising awakenings and twin flames. Other times he wears anger like perfume, bitter and intoxicating. But always, beneath the mask, is the same structure. Absence wrapped in presence. Coldness disguised as mystery. The hollow man who reflects her own unseen hunger. For it is not he who keeps her, it is what he reveals. And that revelation is unbearable. Because if she sees it clearly, the mirror turns on her. And there, flickering beneath the makeup and mantras, is the face she has avoided, her own. Jung taught us that the unconscious is not evil. It is simply everything we have not yet claimed. And for the woman who finds herself in these cycles, the unconscious has a name: abandonment, unworthiness, rage, words too large to say aloud, too heavy to hold without breaking. So she gives them a face, a man. And she tries, again, to love them into healing, believing she is loving him. But in truth, she is loving the shadow. She becomes an alchemist, trying to purify pain into connection. But the shadow does not purify. It consumes. And still she returns. Because the wound is older than this life. It lives in the marrow, passed down from mothers who smiled while dying inside, from grandmothers who whispered warnings in the form of lullabies. Be good, they said. Be quiet. Be kind. He didn't mean it. You'll understand one day. And so she learned that to love is to endure, that to stay is sacred, that to walk away is betrayal. But the body remembers what the mind denies. Each betrayal slices through the veil a little more. And slowly, she begins to see. Not all at once. It never happens that way. Revelation does not arrive with trumpets, but in exhaustion. In the moment she looks at her own reflection and does not recognize herself. In the way her voice catches when she tries to explain the story to a friend and realizes it no longer makes sense, even to her. And something breaks. Not the heart. That broke long ago. What breaks is the illusion that she can save him, that he was ever hers to fix, that this is about love. It isn't. It never was. It was about a ritual, a reenactment, a soul trying, again and again, to find the doorway home by walking into the fire. But fire does not open. It devours. And so the question becomes, Who is she when the mask falls? Jung believed that the anima, the feminine soul, must evolve. From maiden to lover to queen to crone. From projection to embodiment. But embodiment requires grief. Grief for the years lost in fantasy. Grief for the girl who thought love meant sacrifice. Grief for the parts of herself she gave to men who didn't know how to hold them. There is no shortcut through this. It is a death. And like all deaths, it is sacred. But it is also quiet. No ceremony. No applause. Just a slow, silent letting go of a story she once believed would save her. And in its place, something begins to rise. Not confidence. That is too shallow a word. What rises is presence. The presence of a woman who has looked into the abyss and refused to flinch. Who has loved ghosts and still chosen to live. Who no longer begs for breadcrumbs from men who fear their own reflection. She does not hate him. No, that would be too simple. She sees him now not as villain, but as symbol. He played his part in the drama she scripted long ago, and for that, she releases him. Not with bitterness, but with something far more terrifying, indifference. Because the hunger is gone. The pattern has unraveled. She no longer needs him to abandon her to feel real. She has found another source. Jung would call this integration the marriage of shadow and self. The moment the projection collapses and in its place, the soul begins to speak in her own name. She no longer performs femininity for approval. She no longer shapes herself around his wounds. She does not ask him to stay. She does not weep when he leaves. She becomes, not suddenly, but steadily, a flicker of knowing in her chest, a refusal to repeat the old script, a growing recognition of her own depth. She sees now why she was drawn to the wounded, because they mirrored her own unloved parts. But now she sees those parts directly, holds them, names them, loves them, and that changes everything. The man who once pulled her into chaos no longer holds the same power. His silence no longer feels like mystery. His cruelty no longer feels like a challenge. His charm no longer smells like hope, because she no longer sees him through the eyes of her wounds. She sees him through the eyes of her wholeness. And in that vision, he vanishes. Not physically, but energetically. She does not chase. She does not explain. She simply steps out of the cycle, and the pattern collapses behind her like a house of cards touched by truth. This is not the end of the story, but it is the end of the spell. There are cages that do not have bars, and prisons built not of concrete, but of language, of promises, of quiet despair worn like perfume. She does not wear chains, she wears a ring. She smiles in photographs, walks through grocery store aisles, makes weekend plans. And yet her breath is shallow, her laughter delayed. Something inside her curls inward, unnoticed. This is the cage of the acceptable, the approved love. The relationship that everyone praises while the soul decays silently within it. She no longer argues. That was the beginning of the end, when her voice grew tired of echoing in chambers where meaning was never heard. So she stopped trying. Now she nods. She agrees. She apologizes for things she does not regret. And every compromise is another nail in the coffin of who she used to be. But she stays, because the world does not understand the subtler forms of cruelty. It only recognizes the dramatic ones, bruises, shouting, shattered glass. What it does not see is the erosion, the slow bleaching of spirit, the quiet dismissal of dreams, the sideways glances that make her question her own memory, the way love is weaponized, turned into a leash that tightens whenever she tries to grow. He is not a monster. He brings flowers sometimes. He says he's trying, but always on his terms, always within the narrative he has scripted, where she is emotional, overthinking too much. He does not hit. He corrects. He does not scream. He sighs. He does not abandon. He withholds. And this, Jung would say, is a far deeper poison, because it is invisible, and what is invisible cannot be confronted. She feels it in her skin, in the way her body tenses when she hears his footsteps, in the way she checks his face before she speaks, gauging mood before revealing truth, in the way her own intuition has become a stranger. She cannot tell what's real anymore, because his voice has become the narrator of her life. This is what happens when the anima is not honored, but colonized. When the feminine is not revered, but regulated. When a woman's inner wildness is feared, not welcomed, and so it is shamed, belittled, explained away. Her instincts become hysteria. Her insights become insecurities. And slowly, she starts to believe it. That she is the problem. That if only she were calmer, simpler, everything would be fine. But everything is not fine. She feels it in the dreams she no longer remembers. In the mirror she avoids. In the silence she fills with noise, podcasts, scrolling, wine. Anything to drown out the whisper that grows louder with every passing year. This is not your life. But what would she trade it for? Loneliness? Poverty? The disapproval of a mother who still believes suffering in silence is a virtue? Society rewards endurance, not freedom. A woman who leaves is suspect. A woman who stays is strong. But strength, in this context, is just a synonym for self-erasure. She is not admired. She is disappearing. This is what the culture has done. It has taught women to choose comfort over truth, to romanticize suffering, to confuse emotional labor with love. And so they stay, in relationships that feel like mausoleums, in marriages where the only thing alive is the performance. He loves her, perhaps, but not as she is. He loves the echo of her that conforms, the version that flatters his sense of self, the sculpture of her that he can place gently on a pedestal and say, mine. But she was never meant to be sculpture. She was wildfire, stormlight, blood and bone and breath. She was not meant to be understood, only met. And he does not meet her. He manages her. And she feels it, even when she cannot name it. The way his affection depends on her silence. The way her needs are labeled as burdens. The way her joy is suspicious, her sorrow inconvenient. The way he turns every argument into an indictment, every confession into ammunition. Jung said the things we repress do not vanish. They become fate. And so she wakes up one morning, hollow. She puts on her makeup with hands that shake. She answers a text she doesn't care about. She kisses a mouth that no longer tastes like home. And then she drives. Not to escape, but to remember. Something. Anything. A place. A song. A smell that reminds her of who she was before she became a reflection of someone else's idea of love. There is no climax. No fight. No scream in the rain. Just a quiet absence. A drifting away. A door closed gently. A dinner gone uneaten. The cage remains, but she no longer lives in it. And perhaps he never notices. Perhaps he continues to love her ghost. But she is no longer there. Not fully. Because something cracked. Something essential. And through that crack, light entered. Not the light of happiness, that cheap, neon promise, but the light of recognition, of grief, of truth. And once seen, it cannot be unseen. The mask is off. The mirror is intact. And the woman who stares back is no longer willing to be named by another's need. She does not hate him. She pities the part of herself that once begged him to see her, because she now sees herself. And that vision burns. It begins not with a scream, but with stillness. A long exhale she doesn't remember deciding to take. A pause in the ritual of pleasing. A quiet refusal to smile on command. She is sitting alone. The coffee has gone cold, but she hasn't moved. The phone buzzes. She doesn't answer. The light shifts across the wall like time passing without permission. And for the first time in months, maybe years, she listens. Not to him. Not to the voices in her head rehearsing all the things she might say next time he makes her feel small. Not to the friends who mean well, but don't understand. Not to the endless noise of should and must and forgive. She listens to the ache. It doesn't speak in words. It pulses like a memory without form. It doesn't demand. It lingers. She used to drown it in kindness, in performance, in the never-ending effort to be enough. But now she just lets it be. And in that letting, something ancient stirs. Not rage, not yet. That will come later. What stirs now is quieter, older. Like water remembering how to move after winter. Like eyes adjusting to light after a life underground. It is the sound of her own silence. She did not know it had a voice. But it does. a low hum in the bones, a subtle gravity pulling her back to herself. It doesn't offer answers. It doesn't offer comfort. It offers presence. And presence, she realizes, is the most terrifying thing of all. Because once you feel it, you can't pretend anymore. You can't pretend he didn't lie when he said he loved all of you, but only ever touched the parts that didn't threaten him. You can't pretend you're confused when really, you're afraid. Afraid of the loneliness that waits outside the script. Afraid of who you'll be when you're no longer his reflection. You can't pretend the dream is still alive. Not when it's been dying quietly every day you ignored your own voice. This is not a revelation. It is a reckoning. And it doesn't arrive with fire. It arrives like a shadow returning to its body. She walks past a mirror and doesn't flinch. She looks, not to assess, not to adjust, but to witness. And in the glass, she sees someone she hasn't seen in a long time. Someone with questions instead of roles. Someone with boundaries instead of apologies. Someone whose softness is no longer currency. She does not yet know where this will lead. She does not have a plan. She only has the knowing that something inside her has stopped waiting. And that is enough. For now, she does not need to speak it. There is no one to convince. She is not leaving him today. She is not burning the house down. She is simply breathing differently, holding herself a little closer, listening when her body says no, sleeping without guilt. This is what awakening looks like before it has words. It is not triumphant. It is not loud. It is not even brave. It is ordinary, sacredly so. A woman brushing her hair slowly. A woman declining an invitation she doesn't want to accept. A woman turning off her phone and walking, not to arrive, but to feel her feet on the ground. She cries sometimes, but the tears are not sadness. They are saltwater prayers, proof that she is thawing. She smiles, too, not for anyone else, but for the silence that now keeps her company. The silence that does not ask her to perform. The silence that only holds. And in that holding, something grows. A question, maybe. A hunger. Not for him. Not anymore. For truth. For wildness. For the sound of her own name spoken without fear. She does not need to be loved anymore. She needs to be whole. And in this moment, this breath, this quiet rebellion of presence, she already is. It does not happen all at once. The illusion dies the way autumn leaves fall, slowly, unevenly, and without asking permission. There is no announcement, just a quiet unraveling. A detail out of place. A glance that lingers too long in silence. A laugh that no longer reaches the eyes. He is speaking, explaining, performing the same rituals. He touches her shoulder the way he always has, with just enough pressure to claim but not enough to feel. He asks how she is, but does not wait for the answer. He smiles the way he used to, like an actor who forgot his own lines but knows the audience isn't listening. And she watches him, not with hatred, not with love, with clarity. It is the most painful sight in the world, to see the man you once believed in as he truly is, not as a villain, not even as a liar, just as a mirror, a symbol, a man who only ever loved the version of her that cost him nothing, the version who nodded, who softened her voice, who gave. She had called it love. She had called it fate. She had built temples from it, whole futures, whole identities, entire lifetimes sculpted around the echo of a promise that was never really made. But now the echo is gone, and all that remains is the lie, the beautiful lie, that love means saving, that pain means depth, that staying means strength. She remembers now the way she used to look at him, not just with affection, but with hunger, a sacred hunger, the kind that made her believe he held the missing piece of her. She mistook that hunger for destiny. She thought the ache was proof, but the ache was a warning. And now she understands, he was never home. He was the storm that forced her to remember where home truly was. Inside, not in his arms, not in his words, not in the unfinished sentences he left her to complete. She wanted to be seen, and he looked at her through the lens of his own emptiness. He loved her as a symbol, as an idea, as a need, but never as a soul. And she let him, because once, long ago, Someone taught her that love meant becoming whatever they needed, that to be chosen was to be validated, that to be wanted was to be worthy. But that's the most dangerous part of the lie. It wears the face of devotion. It speaks in poems. It survives on sacrifice. And she bled for it, in every smile that cost her peace, in every silence that cost her truth, in every apology she offered without conviction, just to keep the illusion alive. But illusions, like ghosts, only linger if they are fed, and she is tired of feeding what has already died. She says nothing. She simply stands, not to leave and not yet, but to breathe, to reclaim, to remember. And he notices, not with words, but with a flicker in his eyes, a pause in his voice, a subtle falter in the choreography. He feels it, too, the shift, the end that doesn't need to be spoken. Because endings don't always arrive with doors slamming. Sometimes they arrive in the way a woman holds her own gaze, in the way her silence changes shape, in the way her body no longer leans in when he speaks. He says her name. She hears it like a stranger. He reaches for her hand. She lets him, but she is already elsewhere. Somewhere inside her, a door has opened, and on the other side of that door, there is no performance, no waiting, no asking, just breath, just earth, just self. The collapse is not violent. It is sacred. It is the final exhale after years of holding in. It is the funeral of a fantasy and the birth of something raw, something unnamed. She does not know what comes next, but she knows what ends here, and that knowing is everything. There is a silence that follows ruin, not of loss, but of return. The smoke has lifted. The ashes no longer whisper. And what stands among them is not triumph, not certainty, not the glow of resolution. Only her, barefoot, unadorned, whole in a way that has nothing to do with being understood. She walks without needing to be witnessed. There is no one left to convince, no story left to uphold. The mirrors have shattered, and with them, the need to perform. What she carries now cannot be seen. It breathes beneath her skin, in the slow rhythm of someone who has nothing left to prove. This is not the end of suffering. It is the end of bargaining. She no longer pleads with the ache. She no longer asks love to rescue her from herself. She does not wait for the apology. She does not imagine the return. She does not touch the past like a wound to be reopened. She lets it lie. There is beauty in that. A quiet beauty. The kind no one notices except the trees and the wind and the spaces between words. Jung once said that wholeness is not achieved by cutting off a portion of the self, but by integration, by holding the light and the shadow in one gaze, without flinching. She understands now. The fire did not burn her down. It burned through what was never hers. The dream, the performance, the mask. The illusion that love must come with sacrifice. That healing requires a savior. That identity is found in the eyes of the one who stays. But identity is not a performance. It is a presence. It is the moment she sat alone, in the echo of everything she lost, and felt, for the first time, not fear, but stillness. That was the threshold. Not dramatic, not cinematic. Just a pause. A breath held, then released. A thought unspoken. A tear not wiped away. And in that moment, she returned. Not to who she was, but to who she had always been beneath the noise. The woman who does not rush her own becoming, who does not mistake quiet for absence, who knows that some truths arrive only after everything else has fallen away. She stands now in that truth. Not like a banner, not like a battle cry, but like a tree that no longer doubts its roots. There are no final words, no grand conclusions. Life does not resolve. It continues. She will love again, perhaps, but not with hunger, not with ache, not with the hope of being completed. She will love the way the moon rises without asking to be seen. She will be met, or she will move on. Either way, she remains. There is a kind of freedom in this, the kind that cannot be given, only found. Not in escape, not in revenge, in presence, in watching the light shift on the floor and knowing it needs no witness to be real, in hearing the sound of her own footsteps and trusting their rhythm, in waking up with no one beside her and feeling no absence, only space. And in that space, she breathes. She listens. She waits, not for someone else, but for herself to speak, to rise, to write whatever comes next. Not a news story, a real one. One that begins not in longing, but in quiet. Not in fixing, but in being. Not in fire, but in the calm that follows.